let's talk with Nick in Tennessee. Nick has been on the line for about half an hour, so thank you for waiting. And you called in, I think you called in last week to talk to Eric, and now you want to talk about autonomy and free will, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Correct. And I called in a few weeks before that and talked with you about moral systems and how best to establish them.
Yeah, I remember. Let's dive right into it. Can you have autonomy as a moral standard without free will? What do you think, Nick?
Yep. I think you can't. I think if you're going to value the idea that a person should be able to make their own choices and decide, things for themselves about the course of their life, then you're kind of implicitly accepting the idea that we have the ability to make those decisions, and we can we don't have a programming that defines how we behave, because if we did, if you didn't believe in free will and we were all just automatons, then it wouldn't matter if you gave people the ability to quote unquote exercise or make their own choices, because they're incapable of making their choices inherently.
Well, I think that we're confusing a couple different things here. The options are not necessarily libertarian free will, which is the kind of free will that you're describing, or you're an automaton who cannot make choices and is programmed by something to just act without thought. That can kind of be the dichotomy that people fall into. But there is a host of other options available based on what we understand about psychology and biology and neurology. All the ologies tell us that there is a spectrum in between those two. So, for example, one version of not libertarian free will, but not being an automaton, is the idea that our choices are inextricably influenced by prior experiences that we have had, both in terms of us being people in the world and also physical experiences in our bodies, our synapses firing, our, gut microbiome being imbalanced. All of these things inherently impact how we move through the world and the things that we do. That means that we are not free in the libertarian sense, but that doesn't mean that we then don't make choices with that information that we are using. So I'm going to push back on that a little bit. In that situation, if that were the case, that we are being impacted by our biology, by our surroundings, by our prior experience, in a way we can't just decide to ignore, how does that factor into this conversation? Because that's more where I stand when I'm talking about not having free will or my own doubts about it. My understanding of how I work in the world is much more in line with what I just described.
Okay, so the idea then would be that we are capable of making our decisions, but those decisions are influenced by the stuff around us.
Right.
That works. So you would say that, yes, you can value people's ability to I guess it's still making their decisions if they're being influenced by outside forces and by things in their past and stuff.
Yeah.
So what are there any?
Can I offer a little bit more?
I'm actually super curious about the question that Nick was going to ask, and then we can dive deeper in.
Okay.
I didn't have like a particular rebuttal or anything. I was just kind of like processing and working through it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like an argument from consequence, and I kind of want to explore that because
whole other direction. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the argument from consequence is an informal fallacy that people use that it's flawed epistemic reasoning. It is not a good tool. And my best example for the argument from consequence is the Holocaust was awful. And if it had actually happened, that would be really bad. Therefore, it didn't happen.
Please no one clip that in an uncharitable way.
Yeah, that's
So
that's obviously a bad argument.
It is, but you can kind of see where the heart is. Somebody going, I am having trouble recognizing the reality of a thing because it's just awful. And if you have this, I mean, libertarian version of free will, I think that moving to not that does feel, at least to me, like a downgrade. It loses its specialness. And I think that a lot of people will point to exactly what you said, Nick, which is, well, then consequences would be bad if this was true. But that doesn't actually impact whether or not it was true.
Okay, so you're saying that my question would, like in the context of a argument from consequence, would be that if people
didn't have free will.
Yeah, if people didn't have free will, then they
may not.
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the connection.
No worries. So no worries. So it sounded like, how can somebody be held accountable, right? How can somebody how can you judge someone's moral standards if they don't have free will? That sounded to me like what you were saying, and that's why I'm tying this back to the argument from consequence.
Okay.
I think
that wasn't quite where I was going.
Yeah, because
I mean, it could have been further down, but
yeah, because I think that what I was taking from this isn't an attack on whether or not we have free will, but whether or not, if we both agree that we don't, autonomy is a good standard for morality, which is what I've been saying. Mm-hmm. So I've been holding these two things publicly, that I believe that my base values are autonomy and consent. Those are the two that I abide by. And I also don't think that we have libertarian free will. And so I think Nick is calling to be like, all right, how do you parse that? If these are your values, but you don't think that we have choices, how can autonomy and the ability to make choices be something that you think is necessary? Is that more around what you were coming in with, Nick?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
That's interesting. I guess to me that the autonomy free will argument stands regardless of whether or not free will exists. So to me, that exists as a pillar that isn't really influenced by the outcome of the conversation.
How do you mean?
Sure.
So yeah.
Oh, no. Nick, you're the guest. Go for it.
Well, I guess so. One of my questions, I was kind of pondering this over the last week or two, is if we are kind of influenced, right, in a way that kind of causes us to make certain kinds of decisions, but then if people get these intrusive thoughts or kind of like a wild hair, or they'll just do something kind of uncharacteristic. And so I was wondering if there was value in the idea that people should be allowed to make their own choices and deviate from expectations, social norms, etc. Because if we are kind of all in a way programmed to be deterministic in our decision making and whatnot, then adding a little bit of entropy, I guess, or chaos into the decision making process for somebody could be
I'm just going to call it spicy determinism now. That's just what that is. Spicy determinism. Yeah, I don't know, Eric, does that kind of touch on what you were?
I mean, I feel like it just proves the point. Like when you're talking about autonomy and consent, mm-hmm. Does it become more or less valuable if there's free will? Is it more or less useful?
Right, that's the question. Not necessarily the value outside of a practical sense. Is it practical to defend the ability to make choices if we don't have the ability to make choices?
The consent part.
Yeah, I choose to do this with my life. Autonomy, consent. I choose this person as my, life mate. These things are based on the ability to make choices. So if I don't think people can make choices, What's the value in it?
Eric has joined the conversation.
Oh, hi, Eric.
Hi.
Who was I just talking to?
Somebody who is still in a punitive mindset, somebody who is thinking about how society treats that and not on the more in-depth scale where you both are.
We're coming out of the conversations we've been having and moving into the realm of practicality and like more esoteric stuff, I guess.
And I was entirely thinking that we were bringing context. I apologize. Eric has joined the conversation.
Continuity on this show,
right?
No, you're good, because my conversation with you, I think it was last week when V wasn't there, was that like we talked about if a God were good by the standards that we've been discussing, that God would value free will and allow people to make their own decisions. And then, but if that God also believed that they had the best like plan for how people should behave, then that God would need to create a place like hell, a place of exclusion, where people who wanted to do their own thing and make their own decisions could do so without messing up the world that he created. So it's understandable that you'd be thinking about it in kind of that punitive or
the macro sense.
Because that's the context of the conversation you and I had last time.
That's very charitable, Nick. Thank you.
And I pushed back on that hard last week.
I like the idea of hell as just a playpen, like where you're like, this kid's just getting into. Let's just put them in this place right here until they chill out.
Well,
I mean, that's how a lot of some of the more progressive Christians view it.
That is true.
There's also an argument to be made for the fact that we're in hell now, like Earth is hell, by that definition, I guess. But that's a different conversation, I suppose.
Oh, that would be fun to go down, but we need to keep topic. You did call in with something interesting. I do want to make sure that I've officially answered your question, which is not actually an answer, but rather a redefinition of what I mean by determinism. So now that we have that concept in as like the thing that I'm saying, which is not that we are automatons or meat robots, but rather that our choices, which we are capable of making, are inextricably linked to our biology, our experience, our social experience, all of these other things that do not give us as many options as maybe we think we have. In that case, do you think that autonomy and consent can exist in that worldview?
I think that they can, but I think that there's a value change. Like if we are more, the more we are influenced by our past and by the things that make us like what we are, the less libertarian our free will is, what about people whose life influences cause them to make bad decisions, right? And so if we're valuing autonomy and we're also trying to take into account the things that go into a person's like decision-making process, like let's say we have somebody who's been raised by neo-Nazis and hates people of a certain color, and they think that there's a big conspiracy out to eliminate their own culture and heritage, and so they're fighting back. They've got all these bad reasons for the decisions that they make, but we still want to value their decision, their autonomy.
Well, yes and no. So this is where the nuance comes in. And the thing is that autonomy and that consent is necessary for everyone in that situation. And the problem, the core issue with Nazism, with fascism, is that it takes away the autonomy and consent of large groups just for being a part of those groups. So what that person is doing individually is violating the autonomy and consent of multiple other people. And at that point, we then have the situation where it's mitigation of harm, right? Reduction of harm. How can we make the least harm happen? If this person, this theoretical white supremacist, never does anything, never talks to people, never engages with people, and just lives in a basement with his thoughts, cool. I'm not going to go in there, bang the door down, and commit him, right? That's his, like, I'm not thought criming anybody. But the second that that ideology comes into the real world and starts participating and harming people by violating their autonomy and consent, that then becomes a situation where, yes, both people are practicing what they believe or what they see as the truth, but it becomes a question of harm reduction. And most of the time, that means getting rid of the fascist. So, yeah, that's kind of where this becomes a much more complex conversation. When does one person's autonomy to stop at the other person's autonomy, right? So,
right.
I'm so for those of you listening to the podcast or who have not been looking at your computer screen, Eric is giving me very weird eyes right now, and I'm very curious about what that look is for.
I just got out of the punitive headspace. Like I'm trying so
and now
hard.
we put it back in
just in time for me to be like, okay, let's talk about the real deep shit. I get into the headspace. I look back up, and you guys are right into the punitive. I was ready to be there. Oh my God. I got nothing, Nick. I got fucking nothing. I probably do at some point, but not today.
This is what Twitter is useful for.
We can kind of back out of the micro aspect of the conversation and address kind of the overarching macro stuff that I originally discussed weeks ago. So
Nick,
if I understood what you said.
Yeah, we have so many callers on the line, and we are kind of running short on time. I would love to continue this conversation because this is exactly the kind of thing that gets me excited, and I do want Eric to feel like he's included and part of this conversation.
No. I want to prioritize the good conversations. Okay. If you're on the train, I get it. But yeah, we do have other callers.
Nick, thank you so much for being a repeat caller and for bringing such interesting questions. So thanks for calling.
Yeah, gladly. Have a good day.